This is exciting. This is one of our first hybrid events here at Woodland Pattern, and this is a very, very exciting night because, first of all, Lois, I really love your work, and we're just really happy that you're having the book launch here. I'm Jenny Gropp. I'm one of the executive directors of Woodland Pattern Book Center, along with my partner, Laura Solomon, who's in the back. And so we just really want to welcome everybody here. And thanks to Lois and Shannon Brennan and Debra Brehmer and all of you for joining us here, here in the room and also on Crowdcast. So we have several people there too. This is wonderful to have a packed room for this event and also like people joining us online. I'd like to begin with a late acknowledgement. First, here in Milwaukee, we live and work on traditional Potawatomi, Ho-Chunk, and Menominee homelands along the southwest shores of Michigami, part of North America's largest system of freshwater lakes, where the Milwaukee, Menominee, and Kinnickinnic rivers meet, and the people of Wisconsin, sovereign Anishinaabe, Ho-Chunk, Menominee, Oneida, and Mohican nations remain present. We further acknowledge the grave evil colonialism introduced to these lands through genocide as well as slavery, but also via racist and xenophobic beliefs, laws, and practices that continue to inflict harm upon Black, Brown, and Indigenous lives. We honor those who have lived and do live now at these intersections of identity and experience, and we are committed to the active dismantling of white supremacy here. So thank you for acknowledging that here tonight. And again, thank you to Lois Bielefeld for celebrating the publication of To Commit to Memory here at Woodland Pattern. We're thrilled to welcome you in conversation with Shannon Brennan, who is an amazing scholar and mind and presence in the community, and also with Debra Brehmer, who is an incredible person of the community as well and has been for many years. An exhibition of the same title, To Commit to Memory, is on view at the Portrait Society Gallery now through November 13th. And copies of Lois's book are available for sale here this evening. So Peter is out at the front desk and ready to welcome you if you'd like to purchase a copy. We've also been really delighted to curate a book list alongside this exhibition. It's a wonder to witness Lois's work and think about it. It took me a very long time and Laura a very long time to just look through it. You can make connections everywhere throughout her work into, you'll just have to let them talk. I'm going to stop. I'm sorry. This is what the conversation is for. So, anyway, we really appreciate those of you in the gallery for keeping all your masks on for the entire time that you're here, just so we can all stay safe. And there will be time for questions afterwards. So anyone on Crowdcast should feel free to post in the comments because we'll just field those as we go as well. And I'll be handing this mic around the room and we'll be kind of wiping it as we go so that it stays as sanitary as possible. And then that's it. I'm happy to introduce Lois, Deb, and Shannon. I'll read their bios real quick. Lois Bielefeld is a queer, series-based artist working in photography, audio, video, and installation. Her work continually asks the question of what links routine and ritual to the formation of identity and personhood and the development of meaning-making. Recently settling back home in Milwaukee, Lois has lived on both coasts. After her daughter went off to college, Bielefeld decided to pursue her graduate degree and just completed her MFA at California Institute of the Arts. Besides photography, she feels passionate about traveling, hiking, eating, swimming, and bicycling adventures with her wife. Which sounds great to me. Her work is in the permanent collections of the Leslie Lemon Museum of Gay and Lesbian Art in New York City, the Museum of Wisconsin Art, St. Kate Arts Hotel, and the Warehouse Museum and the Racine Art Museum of Wisconsin. Bielefeld is shown at the International Center for Photography in New York City, the Museum of Contemporary Photography in Chicago, the De Young Museum, and St. Kate. Debra Brehmer is the gallery director at Portrait Society Gallery. She is an art historian who teaches part-time at the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design. She has curated numerous exhibitions and has written extensively about art for various publications for 20 years. Locally, her writing can be found regularly in Milwaukee Magazine and nationally in Hyperallergic. She was also the founder, publisher, and editor of Art Muscle magazine. Shannon Brennan is an assistant professor of English at Carthage College and also serves as the director of writing development. She earned her BA degrees in English and theater from the University of Maryland, her MA in English from Fordham University, and her PhD in English from the University of California, Santa Barbara. She specializes in secular American literature, queer theory, and cultural studies, and most recently, she's been teaching in UCLA's writing programs. So, welcome to you all. Pardon my breathlessness.
Thank you. Thank you for those beautiful introductions. Hi, everybody. I'm Debra Brehmer from Portrait Society Gallery. And if you haven't been there, it's a gallery in the 3rd Ward. And Lois's show is on view until November 13th. So be sure to stop by and see it. It's an experience, and you really need to experience it physically and spend a little bit of time there. It's a very thoughtful show that we're just thrilled to have because so many people have been coming in and having the most amazing conversations about the show. And, that happens, in various ways with various projects, but it just feels like, particularly with this project, there's a lot more interaction with the people who are seeing it, and just the commentary and the personal stories that are coming out, and the really quite brilliant observations that people are making about, connections in the show. So it is, it's a very special project, and we're just really honored to have it. And I just want to say there's Sally and Eric are Lois's parents, so I have to introduce them. They're here. Yeah. They are collaborators, I would say, in the show, and the stars of the show for sure. So it's great to see you. I guess I was going to start. Well, I want to thank Woodland Pattern first. I mean, this is such a special place, and I think this is the 3rd exhibition where we've partnered with Woodland Pattern, and I've sent them information about our shows, and they create a reading list. And then we have a weekly newsletter, and every week in the newsletter, I post the link to the one book. And it's just opened up worlds for me because I buy the entire list as soon as they give it to me. So I take this stack of books home, and they're books that I would have never purchased on my own by authors that I don't know. And they're absolutely, it's like this gift. It's so wonderful to have them curate this content for the show. So so if you're not on our mailing list, you might want to sign up so you get these newsletters and can see the reading list. So I was just going to start quickly with kind of an anecdote. This is a very multifaceted exhibition that it takes over the entire gallery plus the hallways, and there's video and there's photography and there's some amount of text to read on the labels. But there was one piece that I sort of have become a little bit fixated on, and I wrote about it last week in the newsletter, and it is the video called Dad and Chair. And it to me, it has become really kind of like one of the anchors of the exhibition, that like all kinds of thoughts and ideas emanate from this. So what it is it's a small screen on the wall, television size screen, and Lois it's a 14-hour video, and of basically Dad sitting in the chair because he starts his morning in the lazy boy and then pretty much stays there throughout the day until bedtime, but getting up to do chores and errands and maybe eat a little lunch, but his presence is for 14 hours pretty much in the lazy boy. So I wrote about it last week's newsletter, and then a writer from the Milwaukee Record named Matt Wild wrote to me right away and said, this has really stirred my curiosity. And could I come to the gallery and watch the full 14 hours? So we set up a chair and gave him some snacks, and he came in with his pillow, and I gave him a key to the gallery. We turned it on and we left, and he stayed, and he's filed an article about it that is really an incredibly beautiful piece of writing. It is, I can't even describe it. It is just an amazing piece of writing. So you might want to check that out. But I was just going to start there with the questions. So Lois, why that photo? How did you come to that idea of photographing Dad for 14 hours in the Lazy Boy? and then could you compare it a little bit to the other major video on the show, which is a picture of Mom, Sally, doing a planking exercise while she's reciting Bible verses that she's memorized, and there's kind of an interesting relationship between the two. But yeah, would you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you everyone for coming, and Woodland Pattern, thank you so much for having us. Let me start actually with the work of my mom called "Thank You, Jesus, for What You're Going to Do." I basically, maybe 2 years ago, my parents were visiting me in Alameda in California, where we were living in the East Bay of San Francisco. And I knew my mom had this daily practice of planking, but I didn't really know too much about it. And so my mom was, and my parents were just in the guest room, and I heard some, just kind of louder voices or a louder voice. So I thought that there was maybe an argument, and I was like, oh my. So, afterwards I was like, is everything okay? And my mom's like, oh yeah, no, I was just doing my plank. And I was like, what do you mean though? I heard, a raised voice. And she was like, oh, well, while I plank, I work on my Bible memory verses by reciting them while planking, because it, gives my mind something to focus on while doing this really, extended, strenuous activity. So I very much so just thought about that and kind of pondered that for a long time. And then, I was in graduate school and thinking about this, just continuing to think about this daily practice of, and my mom planks for this plank, for the piece, it was 13 minutes and some seconds, so maybe 14 seconds. And so there was this really immense act happening on a day-to-day basis, 5 to 6 times a week. And after I made this piece, I was just really, and it took me about 6 months to make. I filmed her on 7 occasions. And then I finally got, I had 13 minutes to get it. So and this piece kind of informs the rest of the work. So then after I made the work, I was really kind of questioning, what does it mean for me as, a queer atheist to present a work about deep devotion and faith and to represent my mom in the gallery. So that's kind of through that line of questioning is where the rest of this work began, and wanting to make a larger body of work with my parents. And so a very long-winded question to answer, sorry. I made this work, and then we started collaborating together and making the photographs. And I wanted something to kind of, be a video about my dad and about to be a counterpart. And I don't know at what point I started thinking about it, but as long as, my dad, sitting in his chair, that chair has always been kind of where he sets camp, and that's like his place. And we could play in the chair, but as soon as Dad came into the room, we scamper out. So basically, I at some point decided it just needed to be an entire day of his waking life. And single frame, just camera watching my dad. And to me, there's an endurance in, sitting in a chair but all day, and that's my thoughts. But the reality is, it's like that's where my dad finds pleasure and is really happy, and that's doing the various activities during the day is where he's comfortable. So I think these are kind of the two stars of the show, I would say, in some ways. Yeah.
Thank you. The next question I had was kind of a general question about the home as subject, because Lois's work for a very long time has focused on the home. This is not the first project that she's done that takes place in the domestic realm. She did a series called Weeknight Dinners, traveled around the country and photographed people eating dinner, really going for economic, social, geographic, age, race, diversity in that project. And then she had another one called The Bedroom, which was kind of a similar project. And some of the people overlap they appear in many of these projects. And then a more recent one is called New Domesticity, which is going into people's homes and sort of looking at family structures and the wide range of types of families and how those families just execute their daily chores and live their daily lives and cook and make things function. So it has been a really long interest. And I'm just wondering why the home has been such an intriguing topic for your work. And, it has historically been weighted toward, sort of like gender roles, very specific gender roles. I mean, that's the conditions probably most of us grew up under. And so the next part of the question is, how does your position as a queer artist enter into the subject matter or affect it, or if it does? And then I wanted Shannon to chime in as well, because you had a lot of interesting things to write about objects and material culture within the domestic realm. So did you get that question? Or
Yes.
do I need to? Okay.
So the home,
The
that
home.
has been, I guess, the main fixture within my work. And I think I just have such an insatiable curiosity about how people choose, how they set up, how they, their roles, how they, why they do what they do within the home, and then aesthetically what that looks like. I mean, even as a kid, I would very much so the first thing I would want to do is see my friends' bedrooms. Like, what toys did they have? What stuff did they have on their walls? And, as we got older, what music did they have? And just how that they put things up. And very much so this, I think initially for me as a photographer, it was all about, does our space reflect who we are? And how does that, manifest? So, but then as a queer artist, very much so for me, it's about visibility. It's about inserting a queer narrative into the art canon, and representing queer families and sharing that as well. So that's just been a part of, a really important part of my work.
And I was thinking, related to that, because you had mentioned like the way that the home is understood sometimes as like feminine space, right? Based on like the separate sphere ideology, like the market is like this masculine space and then the home is feminine space. But I've also been thinking about the ways that, so your series like about weeknight dinners, right? So that's also predicated upon the notion that the public and private are different, and that different things belong in those, like that certain things belong in public space and other things belong in private space. And that idea, I think, has often been used to litigate against queer people, right? Like, for instance, thinking about Christopher Street or thinking about gay neighborhoods, these like public spaces where like queer folks are sort of able to be together, but the idea of engaging in private acts in public space, like having sexual relation or having some kind of erotic connection, like in public space that's taking the private into the public. So I think that division of space isn't just about gender, but is also maybe about sexuality. So anyway, I was thinking about how weeknight dinners, by showing that iteration, many different spaces, many different homes, begins to show the public face of private space, right? Like when I look at that series, I think like, oh, this is a home where people have a lot of money. This is a home where people have less money. And the arrangement of the objects in the home, the arrangement of the food that's chosen and selected isn't necessarily determined entirely by that, but it's enforced by that. So you can see how like the market, the public and the private kind of come together there. So that seems like it also seems to have like a sort of queer consciousness to it.
And just thinking about what we actually do keep behind closed doors versus, that public facing versus private facing. And so there's that axis that I feel incredibly, with my subjects being very collaborative about. But that was also really intriguing, like with weeknight dinners. When I would go in and photograph, I would ask people, just whatever you normally do on a Monday through Thursday. Don't do anything special. Don't set up for me. I want, the real deal. And then there was, I often would have suspicions of like, really, you have, a Cornish game hen and you eat with these dishes? Like, these are really nice dishes. Like, and then, but that's also very much how we want to appear before the camera and then represent the private to, forward facing, which was just as compelling. And I would never, interfere that was their choices. But it was always that like, oh, okay. But then there were some people that were much more open and, very just like, yeah, no, I didn't clean up for you at all. So, which is, another level of, comfort or.
I was thinking today at the gallery that the photographs are constructed. They're not like snapshots or just a shot and, oh, I caught a glimpse of mom, click. She, Lois reconstructs. If she sees a photo that she wants, she reposes it, reconstructs it, sets up banks of strobe light, flash strobes, and asks maybe, mom or dad to wear a certain color shirt. So they're very constructed, and so are the photographs in the bedroom or the other series to some extent, because you are staging and moving, but yet they're like so. They don't feel like they impose a point of view. And I was thinking how like tricky that is to enter in as an artist and really see and construct a photograph. There's a lot of art direction, a lot of, what you want, but what you want isn't necessarily a particular point of view I hope you know what I mean? I mean, it's like a really beautiful place that you hit because the photo still stays so open and full of possibilities, even while you're artificially kind of intentionally organizing it. I don't know if you have a response to that or if it was just an observation.
No, I think it is something I'm really interested in is this like interplay of, me photographing, what my parents regularly do, like these are their, this is their laundry day. This is what happens. And so they're, but then very much so imposing a reenactment on that and them acting out what they do on a day-to-day basis. There's just this really curious dynamic that ends up happening where I think my subjects, because they're so familiar with the actions that they're doing, it feels very natural and they just kind of fall into this like, oh yeah, I know what I'm doing here. I'm just, sorting through laundry. So the photographs then appear more natural as far as them, but then the lighting very much so still shows that this is a stage and these are, this is not like some sort of photojournalistic documentary photograph, but this is a very staged photograph that has been thought through every aspect. And I want that to come through.
Do you have the experience? So as you were just saying that, I was thinking about how when I come home and see my parents, I become a spectator to them in a way that I wasn't when I was growing up. Like when I was growing up, it was like, this is just what we do, right? And then I went away to college and then I would bring somebody home and I'd be like, oh my God, this is what we do? Or or like seeing differently, like through their eyes. So I guess I'm curious about like your sense of being a spectator, having grown up in the same home, and especially in that last photo where one of the things you were commenting on is like, I remember doing this with the toothbrush. I'm just curious in terms of like how you're relating to those scenes as having lived in them in the past. Is that something that happens for you?
No, that's really interesting. So I think about like, even with this, like, you know, as a child, I very much so in our captions, I talk about like, oh, I remember climbing up, you know, to get the sugar or the peanut butter or whatever. And I love to like do it without the step stool, and I could like climb up there, you know, myself. So, but now it's like, I would get the step stool, or, well, I'm also, you know, not as nimble. Let's be real. But yeah, it really is interesting to think about, like, I don't now do stain removal on my clothing. I mean, I don't, you know, how yours raised, you know, with a set of like what the everyday and what you just, the routines and rituals that you follow and that you learn, and what you then bring forward into adult life, and what you reestablish and transition into, and then coming back. There's something about that coming home and coming back after, and staying in my old bedroom, you know, that still is my brother and my room still have our twin beds in it where we can stay when we visit. So there's an even further level of sort of curiosity. And, you know, previously I was just going to, you know, during you know, holiday meals or just to visit. So it was this very specific way of, you know, being together. And so for me to come 2 to 3 days a week to like very much so just observe and then make work together and just hang out was a whole other level of being back and being a spectator. And that's a really interesting. I haven't thought about that, but yeah.
I was just, one more thing I was thinking related to what you had said at the beginning, because when you talked about coming home for the holidays, which has this sort of like, it's like a break in ordinary time, you know, it's like this special sacred time, both in terms of the calendar maybe and in terms of family. But your mom's planking video, is it also a kind of break in ordinary time? Like it, I mean, one of the things that's interesting about it to me is that it does feel like this sacred moment, the way that you were describing, hearing your mom's voice raised. And I was thinking about like whirling dervishes, like Sufis, you know, like sharing sacred poetry and moving in a circle, and the ways that like the body and like the mystical kind of get involved. And yet it's this daily exercise. So, I mean, it's neat that you just said this thing about coming home and seeing your family in these punctuated moments. And in a way, you've kind of located a punctuated moment that's a part of every day. That's part of the ordinary, the 13 minutes of Monday and the 13 minutes of Tuesday and the 13 minutes of Wednesday, as well as something that's durational, that feels like it's just the kind of the regular fabric of the day, the 14-hour.
Right. So you're talking kind of about how these mundane moments that are at the heart of the show, that are being shown, hold these other more profound and spiritual traces, either overtly or indirectly. Is that kind of what you were getting at with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the case in the photos. I think in the planking video, I think it to me it feels really overt, right? This sort of like the enormity of that. But I mean, when I look at those photos, that, you know, I see like spirit photography through all of them. You know, the ways that I mean, both the sense of stewardship, which seems to have some sense of a connection to ethics or a certain worldview in the care for each of those objects, but then also the way that the photos themselves have a sort of the way that they're lit make each of the objects feel really resonant and alive, and having sort of like an aura, like a fetish object, or, you know, like in the kind of like in the religious sense of the word, that it seems as though they carry significance and they organize the lives around them. So yeah, like you know, the laundry kind of floating there in the air, like really still, and obviously like the sensibility of like a photo like this one. I mean, to me, it feels beatific, right? Like the way that the light comes down and the way Sally's eyes are sort of directed upward. Each of these moments, I think there's something about the way that they're lit but also about the documentation that Sally and Eric have offered in describing their lives that seems to suggest a sense of like either a sacrality or like the sacred in a religious sense or in a kind of very everyday kind of secular sense or material sense.
You know, I think that something that we're going to talk about your work for you.
That's great.
That gets at that also in another layer of the show that's very subtle is there's lots of references to time and time passing and two different kinds of time. There's the everyday time that happens, you know, in our household and our chores, and it's Monday at noon and we eat lunch, and you know that the ticking of the clock kind of time. And then there's eternal time. There's heaven. There's spiritual eternity, and so many of the photos manage to get at these notions of time in these beautiful, subtle ways. And I think one of my favorites is there's an almost abstract photograph, maybe it's in here, of the rug, the bedroom door.
Yeah.
No, not that rug.
yeah. The rug.
It's a rug, it's a carpet, and there's just an arc in the carpet. It's almost an abstract photograph. And you don't really know what it is. And what it is it's the bedroom, the bedroom door, as it opens and it closes, it creates this line in the carpet. And it just struck me that, you know, that notion of time being represented by that photograph that continues a life of opening and closing those doors, almost mimicking, you know, the moon or the setting of the sun. It was like, there's just so many moments where you think, like, we're really going off script here, but thinking about can you talk about that a little bit? About, because at one point it just seemed like you were really actively thinking about that through many of these photographs.
Yeah, absolutely. And first, taking it back to the dad in chair video piece, because that becomes within the gallery space, I think the clock.
The clock.
Right. And I mean, initially, he sat down in his chair at 9:07, and that's when the video starts rolling. And then at bed, he goes to bed around 11:30 or something. So initially I was going to have it like play exactly at the same time within a space, but then you would never see the,
Right.
So I went against that, but it still becomes this clock of a whole day, happening. So, and then there was so much about time where, you know, I would photograph them doing, you know, there was activities around grocery shopping and all of the activities around grocery shopping. So there's my mom preparing the list, my parents going through coupons, my dad then, you know, leaving, and my mom basically waiting. You know, after a certain time would pass, she would wait, and so that she could help him bring in the groceries and be there when he would pull up. And then there's them unloading the groceries and putting them into the fridge. So I would photograph every aspect because each part had this structure. So there's the weekly of like there's the day-to-day, you know, habits that become weekly, you know, okay, Thursday's laundry day. And then from there's like the seasonal. And so there was something really important about me photographing them for the full, you know, pretty much every season and having that punctuate within the show. And then photographing them again. So the multiple laundry days. I mean, I have because I wanted, you know, you can tell with the dress, like, oh, it's winter now. They're still doing laundry, you know, so there was, and not all those made it, you know, within the final cuts, but there was something about showing the repetition of our, you know, how we basically carve out our routines and the every, you know, the continuity or the continuing clock of just how we live every day to day, you know, day. That was super important.
Shannon picked up a lot in your essay about how, you know, that combination and how you would access more eternal time, spiritual time, the heavenly time. So, you know, which I think is like, I don't know, do you want to talk a little bit about where you saw that in Lois's
Yeah.
work, how she accessed that? 'Cause that's
Yeah.
kind of a hard thing to photograph.
It is.
Heaven.
Well, I was also, I mean, like maybe one way to think of, or one way that I find myself thinking about it is actually about the resistance to the decay of the object. Like, you know, like the notion of eschatological time is like that our spirits continue, right? Like that instead there is no end, right? There's a certain kind of, there's one moment of terminus, but then there's also a life that continues beyond that. One of the things that really interests me about these photos and about the very rhythms that you were documenting is that how many of those rhythms are also about preserving the afterlife of these of objects in this way that kind of, yeah, that seems like parallel to thinking about your own afterlife. So for instance, did you say that your mom lived on a farm? Is that
Yes.
right? Yeah. And so that like the way that the maintenance of things, right? The maintenance of the world around you organizes life on a farm is like, you know, you and the cow determine there's a certain time of day that certain things take place. And so that's the ordering is about maintaining a number of lives that are there. But when you move some of those orders into like domestic space, you're maintaining very different things, right? You're maintaining laundry and clothing and bottles that can be used for art projects and the roundies half and half, you know, that could perhaps be carried on or handed on. So it just seems really interesting to me to think about that use of rhythms, of those rhythms, but in around practices that are not actually about, you know, like stewardship in this sense that's about like the farm or about animals, but that is instead about like the stewardship of objects that we like to typically throw away and think of as being dead or rotting or going away, and instead hanging on to them. So that's not really about, I mean, I do think there's a lot there to do with like the afterlife spiritually, but I also think one of the things that's most fascinating is just the time and the devotion that's entered into caring for things that aren't sentient, you know, and that are just these physical objects and that we think of as being like things that we can throw away, but instead trying to have them build afterlives for them or have them carry
on. Was it difficult to look so deeply and intimately at your parents' lives and consequently at your own life and your past? And the show is about the act of looking,
Yeah.
and the act, and then, you know, leading to seeing. Because looking and seeing are probably different things. So, yeah, I mean, was it difficult to look that intently at this material that's so close to you?
I mean, I will have to say, like, I have always kept some distance with my relationship with my parents. I think, you know, we have immensely different ideologies, and we that can, you know, simmer a lot, and that has caused me to maybe stay away more. And so for me, there was something about this work that gave us structure and gave us a place to try to make something together and for us to know each other in another capacity, and move somehow, you know, past those differences into making something else and to know each other in other ways. So it definitely, I would say, we had a lot of points of difficulty. I mean, we're spending more time together than since, you know, I moved out in 1996. So, and yet, you know, thinking about in this moment with the pandemic and our vulnerability and feeling so, you know, aware of the vulnerability of our bodies and our lives right now, that I just, you know, and the fact that my parents are aging, and I felt like this work needed to happen now, or potentially I wouldn't have that chance. So I don't know. There was just so much also just really joyful and wonderful moments of hanging out and being like, oh, my dad actually does a lot more around the house. Like, yes, because I came in with my own, obviously my own ideas, very much so about their relationship and how they did things. And I came in with, you know, like there's a sequence called The Most Nutritious Part, and it's a sequence of 24 photographs with basically a row of my dad eating a banana at the breakfast table, and then there's a sequence of banana peels sitting on the table, shot from like down, and then a sequence of my mom scraping the banana peels. And I very much so when I kept coming across these banana peels every morning after my dad had his breakfast, and I was like, Dad, come on, why aren't you cleaning up after your banana peel? Why are you leaving these to my mom? And very much so having this idea of their relationship, and like this, because they have more traditional gender roles than me, and just being like, come on, Dad, really? But the reality is that because by slowing down and really taking the time to look and to pay attention and to observe and understand a marriage of almost 50 years, they have this, my mom actually uses the pulp of a banana peel, and that it is this really nutritious thing, and she'll put it in her cereal, and so my dad just knows that that's something that she wants to use, and so he'll leave it there for her every day, as opposed to throwing in the garbage or in the compost. So there's this beautiful relationship and exchange. And so for me, a lot of it was like, you got to quiet down inside, stop putting my narrative on them, and just pay attention. And so that really opened, I think, a huge space between us.
Wonderful. So I was intrigued by the fact that the two of you ended up working together on this project, and that I sort of discovered that, well, I knew this about Lois, but Lois is a commercial photographer by trade. She's a fashion photographer, and she worked for Kohl's for a long time shooting fashion. Always, though, with keeping your own art practice going at the same time. And that's unusual because a lot of people who work in the commercial world don't have a parallel life in the art world. They're kind of separate worlds. Now she's crossed further over into the art world and leaving behind the commercial world a little bit more. And Shannon teaches in multiple departments, it seems to me. She teaches gender theory and also creative writing. And she's an academic who teaches creative writing. And if you read her essay in the catalog, you can tell that she has that crossover level of interest, because there's the kind of writing is much, I don't want to offend any academics, but it's richer, it's more sumptuous. And so I wanted both of you to talk a little bit about your backgrounds, and are you always conscious of how these different practices are pooling into your work, or or how do they kind of like gift and inform one another? And yeah, that was good.
Do you want to go first? I feel like the answers might be really different. I mean, but that's because I'm making all sorts of assumptions about what the nature of fashion photography is.
It's fabulous.
In every sense of the word, fabulous. But I was thinking about, I mean, you were talking a moment ago about paying attention, and I guess I was thinking about I think that good scholarship and good writing, and then often it seems to me good photography of the kind that you make is about just paying attention, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's what I think those things have in common, and particularly because I do literary studies, and so I think if you're doing it well, most of your aim is to just pay close attention to what's happening, on the page. But in being able to have permission from Lois to engage a little bit more personally in the work, or in her work. I think that just means to some degree being able to pay attention to your own response in addition to paying attention to what you see. As when I'm writing a work of literary history, paying attention to my own response might initiate a thought process, but once I produce something for other people to read, it's not really to do with the thing that initiated my interest. But in this kind of context, like the response itself can be relevant, right? Like the kinds of feeling that it evokes can be relevant. But yeah, I think it has something to do with, I think in the best sense, it has to do with paying attention.
But I think that paying attention with your writing went from, I mean, I think of academic writing as more theory-based and idea-based, and the kind of writing that you brought into the essay was observational too, grounded in looking at the objects, looking at the pictures, noticing the plants. And so that's the intersection that I found interesting in your writing. And I know that it's hard to get students to look at the world, when they write, and not so much just put forth ideas, to like go out and look at something. Do you find that it's the looking? We're back to the idea of looking again. And is it hard to teach looking?
I think maybe the hardest thing that I find is reminding students to have permission to do that, like to have permission to just describe something, or to have permission to just remember something in its richness, like to just spend a little bit of time recollecting and something as it is, without, you described it as being about ideas or about trying to have it conform to something. So right now, a lot of my students like to use the word emotion to describe what they want to provoke, right? Like to produce emotion through and it's hard to understand how to actually deliver emotion to another person. And actually you can't deliver it as an emotion, I don't think. I think you have to deliver it as something else, right? Like you deliver it as sensation, or trying to evoke sensation as best you can, or trying to have specificity as best you can. So I think that oftentimes, I don't know, like we try and take the things that we notice and find a way to make them simpler so that we can then describe them and hand them over to somebody else in something that's smaller, because the things we experience are like spaghetti. They're like unwieldy and they go all over the place. And you can't just give somebody or you think that you can't just give somebody like your hands wrapped around a bunch of spaghetti. But actually, if you really want them to experience spaghetti, that is what you need, what you need to do. But but we in general, as polite people, we put spaghetti in a nice to-go box, and then we give someone a to-go box, and we're like, I hope you remember to open and enjoy the spaghetti. This is a new metaphor for me.
This is a vivid and living example of what you were doing in your essay. Bravo.
Yeah.
Lois, what about you? The commercial Lois versus the artist, and now the MFA, and going to graduate school and putting additional layers on your practice.
And teacher, yeah.
And teaching.
Yeah. So I really feel like my commercial work and my artwork, even though I keep, or my practice, even though I keep them very siloed in some sense, they're constantly like humming and like interacting. So, so much of the times, like I would have never photographed kids if I had not worked at Kohl's, and like that I became the kid photographer there, and I loved it. And but I didn't know that I would have, and then I started thinking about, like, when I was making the work, body of work, Androgyny, I just was like, well, I need to be photographing kids for this as well. It's going to inform this body of work so much further. So, but I don't know that I would have had that, like, I just wouldn't necessarily have thought that unless I was actively, photographing for my job. Mm-hmm. So then that happens with lighting. That happens where, like, there will be a brief, or, very specific what the client wants something to look like. And they'll say, okay, here's the mood board, make pictures like this, or make work like this. And, I very much used to, love to light, obviously love to light, but for lifestyle stuff, it's got to be natural daylight, like, and so that learning to do that, for my commercial work, actually will very much so has influenced how I approach the photographs, even thinking about the outdoor photographs of my parents. And even considering to include those and make those pieces, because in the past I may have not, but I've felt like I could do that in a way that would marry with the hyper lit portraits. So yeah, they definitely entangle, even though they're somewhat siloed.
Mm-hmm. Great. And because you have, I was just thinking, I hadn't thought about this before, but because you have those outdoor photos, then the ones where the one where you're on the outside and you're looking through the window, it actually like extends our sense of that space so that we're like in the yard rather than feeling like we're outside the house. It feels like, oh, I know this yard. And so even though there's a certain element of outsidership that I think that image produces, it's not absolute outsidership because we know how we know how you're able to be there. It's because it's been plowed or shoveled or so thank goodness for your outdoor passion photography.
Well, maybe one more quick question before we open it up.
Yeah.
The titles are really interesting. The way Lois approached titles in this show, I've never really seen anybody do it, and it was very annoying for us when we would have to like create a checklist or put a title in the newsletter because they're long and they're formatted in a certain way. But here's an example. So every title for the image will have one paragraph on the top that is the voice of either her mother or father, looking at the finished picture and reflecting on it. And the second paragraph is Lois offering some kind of reflection on the photograph. So how did you come to format and choose to structure the photographs like that? I mean, I kind of know that it was a very important and precise decision.
Yeah. Well, two things. One, I was previously I pretty much did names and places as my titles, and that was it. It was just a name and maybe Wauwatosa or wherever the photograph was made, and then I made a body of work that was right before this with collaborating with my wife Jackie, and it's called Household, and we were basically, it was during COVID and I couldn't make work in other people's homes. So I decided to take a deep dive into my own home and look at our relationship and how we negotiate the space of home together. So, but thinking about those titles, we were talking about them, and there was so much about like further conversation about the image and like what's happening and like, that like us being in our kitchen in California that was so small, we would call it our 2.5 butt or 1.5 butt kitchen because we just couldn't get two people in there. And so something about that banter, we decided to do these longer titles. And there was a lot of humor in them, and so it just made that body of work and kind of started titling in a very, very different way for me. And then I was, talking, and then going through grad school while making this work, I have so much feedback loop of, from talking to different people, but I was also being mentored by Barbara O'Brien, who's a freelance curator here in Milwaukee. And I was talking to her, I was like, well, I was going to work with my parents on titling the images. And she was like, well, maybe and I had already kind of started, writing some title ideas in the vein of the way that I had made the work with Jackie. And she was like, well, maybe it would be great if your parents like wrote their title so you don't influence them, and just to see what they came up with. And so and then I was like, wait, so they wrote their own title and then I would write my own title? And she was like, well, yeah, because then there would be this really beautiful triangulation that occurs of the image and then each of your titles. And I was like, whoa. Like, so I did not come up with the dual title idea, but I, really was excited about it and very much so glommed onto it. And so it really became this where my parents and I would sit down and I would project, or I would hook up my computer to the TV so that my mom could really see the images because of her partial sight. And so it would be like, not this big, but, pretty large. And then we would sit down and I would write down whatever they wanted to title it. And sometimes I'd push them a little bit because often I think they would want to describe what's happening in the picture. As opposed to, the picture's already there and doing that in a very good manner. So I would be like, well, maybe talk about, or like, what are some other things surrounding this activity that and that tried to get them to think about a bit beyond, because I think the titles really push and expand the work, and they point to memories, they point to different, routines and rituals, and like why those are in place, and so they expand the work.
Can I ask you a follow-up question?
Yeah.
When you were saying that your folks were just describing it, do you recall, was that happening in the present tense? Like, in this photo, we are doing X, Y, and Z?
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting.
Like, I'm waiting for one to come up. But like, my dad's just like, would maybe say something about, I'm raking the front lawn because it's fall. And which is fine, absolutely. But I mean, we've got that part. So, and so then, just push a little bit more about that. And then for me, I'm like, I was thinking a lot about spending time with my dad, like how we would spend time together. And that James Bond was one of those things that we would watch together. So I wanted to kind of, hit on some, other kind of like aspects of our relationship and the memories that I have. Mm-hmm. So.
It also keeps everybody's voice very active in the show.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
In a beautiful way.
Yeah.
It's not like a photographer going in and having subjects and taking over the territory, and
right.
You both became players and actors in the reconstructed photographs. So your parents were very involved in actively involved in shaping the work, and then the voices being present in such a, just like a very concise and beautiful way. I think it held on to the collaborative aspect of the show really nicely.
Yeah, I mean, photography has, even the language surrounding photography, taking a picture, capturing a picture, shooting, like, the language surrounding it is so like colonialistic and very much so take. So I've been trying in subject, as you just said. And so I've been trying to like always use the word participant, or like really think about like reframing the way that I'm, even just describing what my practice is. And my mom was so involved in the whole process. Like, she very much so like had a lot of ideas. We initially sat down and brainstormed like what ideas to do together, and then they kind of emerged from me also observing. But my mom would be like, "Come over here. I'm doing this thing. I want you to observe me. I have to do my inhaler, and I do that every morning at 10 a.m. or whatever." That's not exactly correct, but. And so I would be like, "Oh, I'll come in there with my iPhone and take some snaps." So, or she would say, what should I be wearing? Like normally I would wear something like this for this activity. So there was a lot of, I feel like, collaborative art direction that was happening.
Great. How are we on time? Should we go to questions?
We're right on time.
Oh, yeah.
You can feel free to keep going. While I was back, if we had questions
Go ahead. Okay. Does anybody have any questions they want to insert right now?
Yeah, for sure. Would you mind if I brought you a microphone?
So the first question is, how long were you working with your parents on this specific project?
Right. So we started in July of 2020. So basically, I made the work with Jackie in May of 2020. Then Jackie got, and when we were living in California, Jackie got a job transfer. We moved to Chicago because I was like, okay, I got grand plans. I'm gonna photograph my parents. I'm gonna be flying back and forth all summer. Spend like a week here and a week there with them, make work. And then the pandemic hit, everything shut down. I was like, I'm doing nothing. Okay. But then Jackie got a job transfer and we moved to Chicago, and that really opened up this possibility of us being able to bubble. And so it was terrible that my grad school was remote, but it was also like amazing because I was able to go up literally 2 to 3 days a week and make work. So basically it was July 2020 we started, and then I think I stopped actively photographing probably January of the following year, because then it came down to like now sorting through. There was so much work. And I was still photographing a bit, probably until like March.
And then a follow-up. Did you notice a difference in, so your parents are participants in this?
Yes.
So some of the early photos, was there more anxiety, more preparation? Did that evolve over time?
Definitely, I would say it evolved. And it was interesting because I think, and I guess I could also answer that too. But for me, it was like I was at first just trying to figure out how do I want to photograph them, like what kind of lighting. And they were really, my lighting is already kind of spotlight, like very theatrical, but this was even like too theatrical. And I was trying to also get the sense, even though I photographed them in their house, how many times or how many other bodies of work, it's something about like, the light just like got sucked up in the woods, the darker woods. And I just was like really struggling with, they were just a little too moody. And so it took me a while. So my own anxiety of like trying to get the work to go in like flow. And then, as far as just, and then also the method of like how was I coming up in with the photographs, like originally we had that list and there was like memories on there and there was lots of like different ideas, but I wasn't really it wasn't until I kind of latched onto making all these observational photographs on my iPhone and then going through those pretty much the week before or like the day before I would go up and look through them and be like, oh, this moment was really interesting. Let's remake this. That I kind of figured out my structure. But they are, because I think I have this history of photographing them again and again and again for years, and they've been so immensely generous in being participants that I think they were pretty used to what it was involved. And because also it wasn't like me just coming and having an hour, it was like my lights their guest room became the equipment room, and like it could just be all set up and like it could much more naturally happen. I felt like they were just pretty natural in front of the camera as was, but definitely I think as it gelled more and more and more as we were into the process. Thank you. Yolanda.
I have 2 questions.
Oh, yeah.
Hi. I have 2 questions. So the first question is, did this body of work inspire you in any way of what your next project might be? And then the other question is, I know why Shannon's amazing and why you might want to collaborate with her, but why did you decide to collaborate with Shannon?
Good questions. So future bodies of work, I'm kind of in this like, now what? So I'm not sure yet. I feel like there's a lot of bodies of work that got shelved because of like the new domesticity that I want to finish because of the pandemic. And there's still this like strange moment of like, is it okay to go into people's homes? So, and addressing that comfort level. And so I'm still sort of figuring out what's next. So more to come, hopefully soon. But still finishing other series. And then Shannon, well, besides, just being an amazing dear friend, and I just admire her work very much. I think we have some similar upbringing. So, we're both queer. Shannon was raised also in a Catholic home. And, there were some interesting parallel trajectories that I thought that, and then also, Shannon's like followed, been a part of my work for quite a period of time. And when we were house hunting in Milwaukee, Kat and Shannon were so incredibly kind to let us stay with them. And so, and I was so actively making that work, the work at that time, and like sharing with Kat and Shannon, just it progressing, that it just felt like this really natural, because I felt like Shannon really already had a handle on the work, and was watching it as it was evolving and hearing the conversations of like what I was thinking about, what I was reading and being influenced by, to, kind of, what I was thinking about. So yeah, and I just was so intrigued also what you would write.
Well, and I should just say that I was honored to be asked. Though also, I want to note that you are one of the few people that I know that also knows Edith Wharton's book, The Decoration of Houses, which is also about the ways that our environments, to some degree, dictate the ways that we live our day-to-day lives. So shared passion for an 1896 design manual is obviously a really good reason to collaborate, I think.
Yeah. And there's the banana sequence that I was trying to describe earlier.
Yeah.
I got a bad hip, so it took me a little while to get over here. What really brought me to this show was that we were in West Bend at the Museum of Wisconsin Art and saw the show there. There seemed to be quite large pictures, if I remember. Is that generally the way you work?
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, I definitely will often print larger. Those are like 25 by 35-ish. So yes, that's kind of general.
Yeah.
But for this series, I played with scale.
Size, okay. I really do like how you lit these. That made it feel real warm. But what really also brought me here was the video of In and Out and the breast, which also was related to your mother, I believe.
Yeah.
But I thought that was incredibly fantastic. And how did you get that idea?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And so in the show, there's 4 video works, and the work that you're referring to is called Inheritance, and then it's a various of different recitations, numbers. And so I went on this kind of quest for a text, because I was really interested in this daily practice of my mom memorizing, Bible memory verses, and to the point of memorizing, I mean, whole books of the Bible, which is just astounding to me. And I was just like, wow, what would if I were to memorize something, what would I memorize? A, and then B, like, what happens? What to carry a text with you and to inscribe it on the mind, like, what is that doing? What does that mean? And like being able to like just at any point to just kind of start, saying a Bible memory verse, and is that comforting? Is that what I just wanted to understand that? And so, but I needed to find a text that was like, what would I feel so passionate about to commit to memory? Hence the title of the whole body of work. And so I don't know, I kept like thinking about that. So I was just like, all right, I'm going to find a text, and I just became really obsessed with finding this text. And I was asking Shannon for recommendations. I was asking faculty for recommendations. Went on a whole like feminist manifesto, reading like 2 books that are like, quite thick, just reading through feminist manifestos, which was great. And then, but nothing was quite right, and so I was just in class on Zoom. And so in class, and one of my, Andrea Quaid, who was teaching my body identity, and there's one more in there, the economy, body identity and economy class. And she was just like, hey, you might really enjoy this poem by Juliana Spar from her book, which I should know because should be in my memory. Oh, that's so funny. This is the perfect. Thank you. So this poem appears, and I'm just like, this is it. This is really exciting. And then I was like, oh shit, now I actually have to really memorize this. And how do you do that? I did grow up memorizing Bible verses, but I don't know. That's just was this really odd, strange thing that was actually really hard. This is probably the hardest piece I've made ever. And so that was, I found my text in maybe November, and I didn't do the first recitation until February 15th, I think. And, or somewhere in there. And basically, it took me several months to memorize a 7-minute poem. And so it was, my daughters helped me memorize. So it was really interesting because I, in exchange for my mom's time, she had asked if I would help her memorize 15 minutes a day of her Bible memory verses, which I was terrible at doing, but I tried. And so then it was really a beautiful thing having my daughter try to quiz me. We were on a road trip together for 1 week, so she was quizzing me regularly, and then I would just go on walks and basically, say it over and over and over again. But then I wanted to somehow represent the accumulation of a text. And we're in this moment of COVID where we've got our masks on and our glasses are always fogging. And I'm sure that's partially where it came from. But also there's work by Cynthia Gregg, who's and I might be mispronouncing her last name, who's, I believe, in Michigan, and she was making breath scans that I've always just really been fascinated by. So I was thinking about her work as well. And and then also the endurance factor of for me, I did these outside when it was 20 degrees out during the winter, and trying to record the breath. My ideal was that it would freeze and frost over. So I could only do them in the constraints of when it was cold enough that you could see the breath. And so I did 17 recitations, I think. And what was most fascinating is the first maybe 8, I'm just petrified, and I just am blazing as fast as I can go. There's no right, I'm just like, there are these things, cells, the movement of cells, and the division cells, and it's just like, I just go, and then I forget things, and I forget, and that's interesting. And I forget, so I get stuck in moments, and then I'm sure there's a lot of where I screw up, and I just keep, because there's this huge cyclical part of the poem where it just builds the 7 days of Christmas or whatever 12 days of Christmas. And, so there's that whole thing, looping, where you add one on, and I'm sure I screwed that up a lot. But what's interesting, and then around 10 recitations in, I'm like, oh, I can start thinking about delivery. All right, I think I got this. And I can pause, and I can emphasize areas and really, and then at some point, maybe 16, my brain goes elsewhere, and it starts becoming automatic, where I'm just saying it, and I'm not even thinking anymore. And so my mom and I actually talked a lot about this, and when a text, when it just becomes from the body as opposed to the mind, and then when the mind sometimes interferes, and then you forget, and there's really this interesting interplay. And so I plan to continue to do this work. So I'm right now trying to actively forget the poem. And the title of the book is The Connection of Everyone with Lungs. Came to me finally. How embarrassing. And so, but I'm trying to actively kind of forget it. And so I'm really interested in then doing, for one more winter, a series of recitations, and seeing also what happens as it becomes even more committed to memory. So thank you for that.
Yeah, it's funny. Somebody in the chat just put this connection with everyone with lungs, which is it is an amazing book. I had the chance to work with Juliana Spar when I was a graduate student, and she actually did a huge exercise with all of us where we were writing amongst this. Does she know about this project?
Yeah, I did reach out to her before embarking on it via email, and through the introduction of my professor, Andrea Quaid. And so, yeah, she does. And she gave me the go-ahead, which was so cool. And then I've kind of sent her touch it or check it, or just hey, this is happening, or yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah.
mentioned future projects, what you're gonna do. Do you ever foresee yourself adding to your mom and dad's project?
Yeah, that's
Like with visiting people? Oh, well, of course, they'd have to have an okay to take pictures of their friends or something. But just
so including like
expounding on what you've already started, just to continue their story or whatever.
Yeah, I don't see this as like a completed body of work per se. I mean, I feel like I know we still had ideas that we wanted to do, and not just photographic and video ideas, but also like potentially my mom, has this where she reuses everything from bags to toilet paper rolls and tries to find artists and crafts, for like teachers to take egg cartons to then reuse them in art projects, or gardeners that might use milk jugs in their gardens. So we've talked about making some sort of piece together using some of those materials, and I just didn't come up with the idea yet. And maybe same with maybe my mom will have an idea too. So I do see this still as this open sort of space of making, and I just, yeah, it definitely will continue.
We have a question from Crowdcast. From Josie Osborne.
Hi, Josie.
Hi, Josie.
Hey, Josie.
Hi, Kim, if Kim's there.
So the question is, color and light feels very important in the larger pieces and lends to the theatricality of the work. Could you talk about that?
Yes. Definitely, wait, color and light was right?
Yeah, color and light.
Okay, yeah. Yes, both. Yeah, I it's so interesting. Like color is just something that's the heart. And lighting. I mean, light is the crux of photography. It's we're just defining what is a photograph actually like defined as, and light sensitive paper or some light sensitive film or light sensor is okay. I'm really stumbling over that, but yes, it's everything, light and color, and I'm really sensitive to that. So very much so thinking about like this image. My mom's yellow shirt in conjunction with the like sort of yellowish avocado-ish green of the room, playing then into the quilt and the blue carpet. There's something about how that's all working together. And sometimes, my mom would just be wearing something. I'm like, oh, that's perfect. But, she was always like, maybe we should try this on, or that, and try this color on. And there is a certain interesting flow to the, like we were, Deb and I were talking about that when we were putting up the show, the color fields, and like how there's these burgundies and this, and richer colors in certain areas. And then how, I don't know.
It's kind of a fun thing to pick up on when you're looking at the show, because it doesn't jump out at you, but as you spend more time in the show, you see that it's a calculated palette.
Mm-hmm.
The pinks, the blues, the soft pastels, sometimes, very specifically using like your bright red scarf for emphasis in an image, or so that's a really lovely composed part of each of the pieces too, and how the little links that you find that connect the whole body of work are really lovely.
Indeed, Josie also follows up and says it makes them so painterly, like Vermeer paintings, but also structures them in a powerful way.
Yeah, I mean, I was also thinking a lot about 17th century genre painting, and there was just something that everyone kept telling me at various points, like, you should, are you influenced by the Dutch artist, and I was like, well, I mean, kind of grew up looking at those paintings in museums, but not specifically. So when in grad school, you you do that research, and so I did a whole paper on and presentation on the Dutch masters, and kind of really dug into those genre paintings. So absolutely. So thank you. That's a huge compliment.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Huge compliment.
You probably haven't had time to reflect on this yet, but maybe it's not even fair to ask, but did grad school, has it changed your world? Has it changed your life? Has it changed your art practice? And it's so close to you. You just graduated, but do you have any insights into what that's brought to your practice?
Yeah, I think for me, the main thing is like incorporating reading so heavily into my practice. And it's interesting because there's this, like thinking about a text, and thinking about text, like to me, there became this point of like, I mean, I look at how much, the Bible is so important to my parents, and this text is they're everything. And my texts have just, become these other texts. And there's this need to I don't know, think about ideas and expand on them in different ways. And so now I very much, there's all of these ideas that I never had been exposed to or thought of until faculty, recommended, or through obviously classes and assigned readings. But definitely, I would say that's the big thing.
That's great.
But the text is sacred, which is so funny to say because but
Well, you ask in one of the videos, I'm paraphrasing it, but something about, with your parents, they have a text.
Yeah.
They have a text to live by, and it's the guiding principles of your entire life. And it gives you such an orientation, and faith imbues everything. And you mentioned in the video, what if you don't have a book? What if you don't have a text? And didn't something like that?
Yeah.
And maybe grad school was the place that started to provide the text and the chapters that will become, your operating manual to some extent.
Yeah.
One of the things I was just thinking is when you were talking about your search for your text and about the genres that you were looking at, like manifesto, right? Or poetry, and obviously something that's unique and interesting about the Christian Bible is that it's got a lot of genres in it, right? Like you've got some glorious love poetry, and then you've got just some letters, and then you've got some stories, and then you've got some stories that are within stories, right? So there are all these different narrative modes that take place and that the Bible involves, but perhaps the most significant one is the way that text inscribes you within it. Right. And I'm thinking about this essay by Michael Warner, where he talks about us trying to compare being queer to his youthful Pentecostalism. And he's both of them involve enormous outspringings of emotion and affect and an engagement with the world. And so being queer and being a kid, a Pentecostal kid, there's a lot that's alike about it. But he also says but what my experience as a queer person doesn't have is a grand narrative where I play a significant role as a character, right? That the narrative of Christianity, the whole story, the whole story, and it's not just about someone else, it's also about you. And the story, the place that you play within that story, and that everything that happens in your life is both small scale because it's yours and it's what you're doing, but it's also large scale because it's this small version of the grand battle, right? The grand narrative. And so I was thinking about the distinction between that picture, which is narrative, and what you do, which is photography. Do you know what I mean? That it's not about telling it's not about telling a story that moves forward. It's trying to capture a particular thing. But I'm just curious about, as you're thinking about grad school texts or these other texts, do you see yourself as a player in these stories that you've collected, or do they seem outside of you? Are you aligning your ideology to a text, or is there a way that you're searching for something that's trying to tell the story of what you're?
I don't know yet. I mean, I feel like things there's a lot of overlapping spheres that keep happening where it's like I'll be reading Timothy Ingold's The Textility of Making, and that will reference something else that I've read just recently. And it's like, there's all of these thinkers that are, kind of, I guess riffing off of each other, and if you could say, and so, but I'm just becoming familiar with all of the players, and then the history of riffing off of older, like going all the way back to Kant, or so there's like, I think I'm still just. I've got my 2 years, and now I have like you get basically in grad school. I feel like you get this reading list that will now occupy me for the next 20 years. Mm-hmm. So
it's good.
I feel like
your buck.
Yeah. It's just getting my bearings.
Well, just now you're describing both like being embedded in a community and knowing a language like jazz, right? Like I think that seems riffing is a great word for it. So that seems like part of that process.
Yeah.
Sally and Eric, do you have any questions for Lois or comments?
I thought of, am I supposed to stand up or can I just sit here?
Oh, stand up.
I can try. If I can do this and read what I wrote.
That's perfect.
Does this work?
Yep.
Since you took a huge amount of pictures, and in 4 videos, how did you figure out what to put in the exhibit down at the Portrait Society Gallery, and what did you figure out to put in the book, and are they the same or are they different? And also, do you have a whole pile of pictures that you could do another show with? Or were these the best and the other ones didn't turn out well?
Well, it's really interesting actually, because I think my work is so accumulative. Like I get so fixated on something where it's like with the bedroom series, my very first body of work, I was like, I'm going to make 100 portraits of people in their bedrooms. We got to make that many, and so and saying, with my parents, it was just like we were on this like go, and even I feel like there was this point, Mom, where you were just like, we had already made like 3 or 4 photographs. I mean, this is like a lot of lighting setup. I mean, I'm setting up sometimes 5 lights per shot, and then I got to download things and rename them and whatever. So it's just kind of a process. And then I think, Mom, there was like, it was supposed to be started to get really hot. So you were like, well, we should do those other photographs upstairs today because it's going to be hot the rest of the week. And I was like, really? But Mom, I mean, we can make those tomorrow morning. I'm tired. And she was like, no, we should get those done today. I'm like, okay, yep, let's go do them. So there's this accumulation that happens, and then it's like sorting through and trying to make some sort of narrative and some sort of and for a show there's the space, so you really have to like consider how the space flows and we like, wow, I mean I came in with gobs and gobs of work prints and we like put up and tried this and that and that was just work prints, and then I printed the show and framed and then had to think about sizing. So it was just agonizing to cut out. I'm like, but this picture has to stay in, but there's no place for it. Like this pairing, the setup is great, but it's missing this, like these 7 pictures that should be in the show. So there was this agonizing process of editing. And that's what I kept being like, well, that's what the book's for. The book can be this, like, it can be the like massive thing that it is, but that too had to have a like cutting down and like a flow. And fortunately, I had people to like rethink that. I'm part of a collective. 2 of my members are here tonight, Joel and Anna, and shout out to EBT. They worked with me. We would meet every week and going over, just all the time going over the sequencing. Unfortunately, because for grad school, I was constantly sharing the work and getting that feedback loop. Like there was kind of certain images that kept popping up to the top that like were, and it just sort of came together, like the edit for the book, because I kept having to share the work and always making these PDFs and these, presentations of the work, and because for classes, for critiques, that it was just, that started to flow. The show was harder to cut down. That was actually agonizing.
Because the show is such a different entity than a book.
Yeah.
A book is sequential. You can page through it. You can go at your own pace. And a show is physical. So a viewer walks in, we wanted to set up kind of the emotional tone of the show right away by creating a video room. It's the first room you enter, the planking. So you sit in the planking video in the room alone for 12 minutes. You watch this very, very intense practice of endurance and physical endurance, mental endurance. You see the strain and the struggle and the absolute determination to do this and to maybe even get another minute in the next day, increase the planking time. So that was a very beautiful part of just to like, almost like, going into a chamber and like completely getting acclimated to your new environment. And then walking through the show, and the show, it doesn't exactly have a particular narrative order, but there needed to be a lot of like shifts in tone and energies, and to keep the viewer engaged and kind of like discovering these points along the way. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
To figure out, how to make those shifts of rhythm throughout the show that really, really bring a viewer through and keep their minds open, because there's these elements of surprise, and it's fun, but really agonizing. That editing is just, I'm still in pain about some of the photos that were left out of the show. I just can't get over it. And so it is tough. I mean, boy, this is a complicated undertaking. And I was thinking how collaborative it was for you when you're talking about the school and the critique group and Barbara O'Brien and working, with the book designer and working with Shannon and the discussions and how do you not lose yourself within all of that? I mean, I find it working, it's hard for me to work collaboratively in that way, because I get too confused by too many voices, and you're so good at it. Like many of your projects involve that communal spirit. I don't know how you do that, but it feeds you.
Yeah.
And then you make order out of it.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to comment on regarding the plank, we did that. That was, like Lois, you said that we started working on the piece, and I mean, most of the main body of the work in July of 2020, July of 2020. Yeah, but the plank we did in, I think we did one plank in October 2019 and one in November. And you took those back to the teachers and to your fellow students and faculty. and they told you that you were learning how to videotape, and they told you that you came back and told me we need to make 5 more during Christmas break. And I thought, oh my goodness gracious, I'm going to have to review everything I've learned. Because I was using all the different, like I did one videotape of Psalms and one videotape where I did Isaiah 40 and Luke 2, and I forgot what I put with it for a Christmas thing, and then I did one of something else, I can't remember, and then I started doing Philippians, and we did 3 or 4 of Philippians, and the videotape number 7 was the one that was accepted, and but these last 5 were done in December and early January of, what did it be,
2020, or January 2020.
Yeah, December 2019 and January 2020. And talk about fear. I'm probably the only subject, or the only what do you call this?
Participant.
Model or participant or whatever I am, that was terrified.
No, not true.
I was really scared, and Lois was trying to tell me that she said she's the one that should be scared because she's the one that's going to get graded. But I was really scared. But I really prayed a lot, and God gave me the ability to do it. And it turned out okay. And after that, anything Lois asked me to do was easy. It was great fun, and I mean, it wasn't hard to do photos after that.
Thank you.
Nothing there? Yeah. Any other questions? Comments?
Thank you.
Truly wonderful. Yeah.
Was it fun?
Good
Yeah,
question.
Definitely a lot of fun.
Did you have fun?
Absolutely. Well, no, because there's a photograph of my parents having a picnic, in their living room, where my mom is roasting marshmallows, my dad's got a hot dog, and that was one of the pieces that kind of the planking video, and then that piece kind of prompted this, because I mean, before I was even actively thinking about making this work at all, my mom and dad told me, oh yeah, sometimes we have a picnic while we burn our bills in the fireplace. and we'll roast marshmallows. And I was just like, that's the sweetest thing I've ever heard. Like, I love that. Like, that's amazing. I need to make an image about that someday. And so this gave us that chance. And I know my mom very much so loves having the fires and the fireplaces. And I remember doing that as a kid. So yeah, I think we had a lot of fun.
But anyway, it was from the planking thing, I think your faculty advisors or your fellow students or somebody suggested that you do this work. At least that's what you told us.
Yeah, that was in my one of my classes, my critique classes, that my peers and faculty, just was like, hey, you might want to explore this a little more.
So it was a great lesson in being faithful to do what God calls me to do, and trusting Him that I will not be afraid. And I'm very happy I did it.
Was it scary at all to decide to share so much of your lives with the public? I mean, this is your intimate space, your home, your daily routines, your toothbrush is in there. Was it, did it, Did you have any qualms about opening up your private space and everyday lives to people?
We had no problem, except, or at least I had no problem. Maybe I should word it that way. I had he had two problems. One is, it was very, very hard trying to do all the year of, the summer of let's see, what would have that been? That would have been the summer of 2020 and all the next school year. Is that right?
Yep.
I was trying to do all these videos, or all these pictures, these photos for Lois. I mean, that school year. Plus, they did, because of COVID, the ladies' Bible study was online, so I had to learn how to use the computer for the online study and the online prayer group, and how to do like I was even considering just giving it up and doing not doing the study, because I couldn't get together with a friend to work on the homework, somebody to read it out to me. There's a lady who's blind and me partially sighted, and there's a lady named Amy who helps us with the reading for the homework. And I just felt like I couldn't do all this and do all these photos and run a house and do meals and dishes and laundry and prayer time and praying for my kids and everything and get any sleep. And so I was fearful about all of that. And I was thinking about dropping out of the study and because I didn't see how I could do the homework, not when I couldn't meet with anybody. And I was telling our son Dan, who's in Seoul, I said, Dan, I think I should drop out of the study. I just can't do the homework. And Dan says, Dan's like Lois. He's not a believer. He says that Christianity isn't true. And anyway, Dan says, Mom, you can too do this. You can do this by conference phone call. And so I set up, I learned how to do conference phone call. And all of this was going on. I was doing all these photos for Lois and trying to learn all this stuff to be able to do the Bible study and the prayer group at home, and run a house. And I felt just totally overwhelmed. And I felt like, how in the world am I going to make it through each day? But God brought me safely through. And I'm glad I did it. And I learned a lot. And let's see, what did you say about revealing our personal lives?
Yeah, was it difficult to think about putting that all on public display? And I mean, it makes you kind of vulnerable.
It was not hard at all, because I have nothing to hide of just general living. But she did request that we have a picture of us being in bed. And we could have, the covers on or sheets, or we could have jammies on or whatever, and we could be reading or something. But we refused. That's the one picture we refused, partly because we don't spend a whole lot of time reading a bit. We do a little bit of that, but not much. And we wanted to be authentic. And telling the truth about ourselves. And the other thing was that we felt that our time in bed was our private affair.
Okay, so there was a line there between private and public.
That there is a place when you're married for, 48 and a half years? It wasn't quite that long yet. It'll be 49 this December. We thought that there's a place to stay now. So we did.
Okay.
I think Lois was disappointed, but that's how life's going to be.
No, that was fine. Yeah, so this is
in our room.
Right, it's in their bedroom, and of the radiator and the but there's a poster that was there, and you can see the mark of the poster that hung there for so many years, and then at some point it fell down and was not put back up. But I'm so interested again, like the carpet line, in how, over time, the marks that we make on the homes, and then conversely, how the homes make marks on us through our behaviors and our routines.
And the picture was taken, I looked at that for a long time. That's taken from the hallway, right?
No, it's not actually. It's probably me. I'm probably
From the closet.
just in front of your bed. Yeah.
Oh, just a minute, but what is that thing that makes it,
So it maybe the.
how do you do this? I'm trying to figure this out.
So, the on-camera flash also gives it. Yeah, but the on-camera flash also kind of gives it a little bit of a disorientation, I would say, as well, because it's not the natural light that you would be witnessing in that space.
Oh, is that a mirror showing that?
No. It's me photographing straight on, but yeah.
So, but, when you asked about sharing our public life, or sharing our home, it did bother me a little bit that things were untidy. I would really like to have my house beautiful. But, and things, there wouldn't be piles of this and that and the other things sitting around waiting to be sorted and organized. But I have long since come to the conclusion that hospitality is very important. It says, share with God's people who are in need, practice hospitality. That's one of the scripture verses. And I've long since come to the conclusion it doesn't matter whatever the situation may be, people and hospitality are way more important than whether my house is in order. If I can have it house beautiful, fine. But if I can't, then the people in the projects come first. Even to the point of when Lois and Dan were in high school, some of the other mothers wouldn't do it, but I let them bring their frogs home and put them in the fridge so they could study for their biology class.
Oh, okay. I was like,
I've never heard anyone describe the sharing of a project, an art project in a public space or with a book, as an act of hospitality. I think I will remember that forever. Thank you. No, it is a completely different angle on all of this, isn't it? That was really beautiful. Huh.
Yeah.
Are we adjourning to the book signing?
Probably adjourn to the signing at this point, but I do want to say thank you. Especially, it's really an honor to have Sally and Eric here and to hear their point of view added to the conversation. And again, this act of hospitality, it's a really intimate space that's been created here tonight, and an opening of a lot of thoughts. So I want to thank you all for just coming to this conversation. Thank you for providing that. And thank you, everyone on Crowdcast, for being here too. And yes, please adjourn and get a book and celebrate to commit to memory, and congratulations.